Okay, great. Well, thank you very much. My name is Michael Mislak. I'm a pathologist at Newton Wellesley Hospital here in Newton, Massachusetts, and I'm a member of the College of American Pathologists. And I'm talking today with Mike Streissguth, who is a professor of communications and film studies at Lemoyne College in New York. And we're going to talk about today an incredible piece, an iconic album that I was able to obtain. You'll see it over my right shoulder here. And I want to talk to Mike, who knows really well about Johnny Cash. He's written several books, biographies. He's helped produce and write a movie about this particular album. And first of all, I'd like to thank you very much for joining me today, Mike.
It's my pleasure, Michael. It's great to be with you, and for such a great cause too.
Yeah, what I failed to mention at the beginning is that we're going to be putting this album up for auction, and the proceeds are going to be going towards the College of American Pathologists Foundation, of which that money is going to go directly towards helping save women's lives who are at risk of cervical and breast cancer in underserved areas across the country, some of whom have never seen a doctor or haven't seen a doctor in decades. And I can tell you from personal experience, we've definitely saved lives through the initiative, and every bit of money helps in providing supplies and getting connecting, breaking down barriers to access for care among these women. And we're hoping to raise a lot of money, interest in this album. And what better way to discuss it is to really dive into Johnny Cash, Folsom Prison, and what this album really meant to society at the time. So, Mike, one thing, I watched your movie. It was incredible. I really recommend viewers to get a hold of that. I wrote down a couple of phrases from it that really resonated from me, and one was, I forget which character in the movie said it, but this album, Johnny Cash Live at Folsom Prison, was really the hinge that opened the door for Johnny Cash.
That's right. He was a very popular performer, entertainer, leading up to the recording of this album in 1968. There's no question. He'd already established a Hall of Fame career, but he was struggling, and he was struggling with the personal demons, addiction, problems in his family life. And his record sales were flagging to some extent, mostly because his label, Columbia, couldn't get him in the studio to record new music. And he was often not showing up for gigs. So the word was getting around the promotion and concert community that Cash was somewhat unreliable. And this album, which he had a sense recorded live at Folsom State Prison in California, would really appeal to his audience. And he was right on. He was right on. This album, which almost everybody sort of wrote off. And so the idea was written off by his own musicians, people at the label, but it sold millions. It went gold very quickly in 1968, and it turned his career around. It made him an international figure.
Wow.
No question.
Yeah, and just a quick Google search, I found that that's his #1 album, his most popular album, and I did not know that beforehand. Now, this idea of doing a show at the prison was not new in '68. He had thoughts or rumblings about this back in the '50s, I believe. Is that right?
That's right. He first started playing prisons in 1957 at Huntsville State Prison in Texas. And he began getting letters. This was after he recorded one of his big hits, Folsom Prison Blues, from inmates, from prison authorities around the country, assuming maybe he'd been in prison himself and had a good redemption story to tell. And he was invited to play prisons. And he began playing regularly San Quentin State Prison in California in the late 1950s on New Year's Day. Every day there was entertainment for the inmates. And so this became a thing. And he again understood when he saw the reaction of the inmates to him that this could make for a very electric recording. And his label wasn't so sure. They were concerned about a live prison concert album affecting the perception of him, affecting the reputation of the label. And finally, in the late 60s, a well-known producer named Bob Johnston, who was well known for his work with Bob Dylan and others, took the reins of the Nashville office of Columbia Records, and he green-lighted the idea immediately. And as we say, as this is why we're talking about the album still right now, and why it's his #1 album. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. And I think it was his daughter in the film, Roseanne Cash, that mentioned that quote, great artists see something, and he saw something, and he knew that this would resonate not only with the inmates, but the general public. And like you say, it really turned things around and shot off with the public.
It did. In fact, his drummer, Fluke Holland, said he didn't think that it would pay for the tape that it was recorded on. But as Roseanne points out, great artists can often see things that we can't. We mere mortals can't. So, yes.
Right. And reading the book, which we have right here, and this is also going to be bundled in with the signed album. Mike has graciously agreed to sign a copy, and we're going to bundle that in with the album, of which this is going to be a priceless offering. It's hard to set a price on it. The album is signed by Johnny Cash himself, and I looked at the album to try and decipher and get some copyright information about when it may have been pressed. And from what I can decipher off of the code on the inner part of the album is that it looks like it was a first pressing, which means that this is in 68. And there are some condition issues to the cover being 50 years old, but the signature is really strong and bold, and I'll show that in a little bit. But reading the book and also the movie, he described as a very somber atmosphere going into the prison. So I imagine this was something that prisoners really looked forward to, a spark of light here in their day.
That's the truth. In fact, it was important in writing the book and then making this film with the director Bester Cram, who's there in Boston actually with you, that we understand the inmates' perspective on this concert. I mean, everybody says that Cash did such a great thing for inmates by paying attention to them. And we wanted to confirm that. We wanted to get that perspective. And so in the film, in the book, you meet two inmates. One of them is Millard Deadman, who was there at Folsom, who was in the audience, and who was a musician himself. And he speaks very eloquently about how he felt that Cash was really connecting with the audience, and indeed giving them a feeling of just what it was like to be on the outside, reminding them of going to a concert like everybody does on the outside. And I think also he said that he could really feel the warmth and the concern coming to them. The other inmate is Glenn Shirley, and Glenn Shirley has a very complicated story. It's traced in both the film and the book. Cash actually worked to get Glenn Shirley out of prison and put him to work as a performer on his show, as a songwriter in his publishing company. Shirley's story is complicated, as I said, but what's interesting is that he wrote a song for Cash that he performed on that day in late January of 1968 when he performed at Folsom, and it's called Greystone Chapel. That will be interesting, I think, to hear that song to whoever will bid on this album and read the story in the book.
Yeah, definitely. Whoever bids on it, wins it, is going to want to see the movie, read the book, and know some of the meaning behind these songs. As you mentioned, that Greystone Chapel song was presented to Cash the night before, and he stayed up all night to learn the song. And I don't think Glenn Shirley knew that it was going to be performed, and he called him out and thanked him. There's a picture of Johnny Cash shaking his hand in the front row with it. That's pretty moving. What I found interesting is that it was mentioned several times that Johnny Cash knew that he was singing to murderers, rapists, other hardcore criminals, but he also recognized the social injustice that was present at the time, and perhaps still is to some extent, that people are serving times unjustly or for crimes that don't merit that type of punishment. And as you mentioned, Glenn Shirley, who he hired afterwards, he then, both of them testified in Congress in the early 70s on prison reform.
Yes. And not only Glenn Shirley, but other inmates were given the opportunity to walk away from prison because of Cash's advocacy and Cash's work. And he became something of a spokesperson on prison reform in the wake of the Folsom concert and the recording. In fact, he testified on Capitol Hill. He lobbied President Nixon at the time on this subject. And for a period of time in the late 1960s, early 70s, he was probably the most prominent name on the subject of prison reform. And he had a television show in the late 60s and early 70s on ABC. And whenever he had the opportunity, he focused on issues of incarceration and reform. And it became something of a life work for him, no question.
Wow, it's almost as if Johnny Cash had two careers: his early career and then Folsom Prison here, which is a turning point for him that reignited his career, but also shined a light on the social injustices of prison, and had a message there to bring to the public.
And that's what, to me, is so exciting about Cash, that he used his art for a purpose. I mean, he saw a way to have an influence. I mean, it wasn't just about recording the music and making the money and going on tour. It was a cause with him, whether that was preserving songs from the American folk canon, or advocating on behalf of Native people, or prisoners, inmates, people who were on the fringes of society. And that's why I tell people that Cash is kind of a stick to your ribs kind of artist. And it's largely, in my mind, because that he felt like his music had a purpose, that he could do something, accomplish something with it.
Right. And I think he really became an icon and a hero to the downtrodden, and, as you mentioned, the fringes of society. But in doing so, was widely popular among the general public too, which is, I think, is a hard line to walk, and to sort of stitch together all aspects of society in the way that he did, but he successfully did it. I and feel as though, watching your movie and reading the book, that the prisoners appreciated it. They knew that he cared for them by performing for them, and that he was truly interested in trying to change their lives. One incident that stuck out to me was that Merle Haggard, a famous country singer in his own right, who had served time, Johnny Cash was talking to him and said, "Haggard, you're everything I wasn't," because so many people thought, because of the persona and these concerts, that Johnny Cash must have served time. How could he know us so well if he didn't serve time?
That's right. And actually, that didn't hurt his image, that element of danger associated with it. But indeed, he'd never done hard time. Sometimes he encouraged that misperception, and sometimes he was stuck disavowing it. And but he'd often get into a cab, and the cabbie would say, "Hey, I was in Folsom with you," or "My uncle was in Folsom with you back in the '60s." But that was part of the persona, part of the kind of man in black persona.
Exactly.
That maybe this guy had shot a man in Reno just to watch him die, which
Right.
part of the lyrics from Folsom Prison Blues. But of course he hadn't. A few nights in jails here and there, but no hard time.
Right. I'll bring this a little closer. So the album is in really spectacular condition. The cover has got a few wears, par for the age, and you can see the signature is really held up really well, and it's bold, it's recognizable. It is certified, so the bidder can feel confident that it's not a fraud or counterfeit. And I'm sure you probably recognize Johnny Cash's signature.
No question. And I see that wear on the cover as kind of a patina, really.
Yeah, exactly. I feel as though that also adds to it. It's the patina. You're not going to duplicate that by going out to the store and roughing up a copy and trying to sign it. So that's what we have here. We'll be posting this on YouTube, I believe, and we'll put a link to the auction when it becomes live. It'll be very soon and generally runs for about 2 weeks. And we're hoping that you bid often, bid high. Thank you for watching the interview. We hope you've learned something from it in so doing, and come away knowing a little bit more about Johnny Cash, about the Folsom Prison album. And if you're not the winner, at least get a copy of Mike's book here. Also look for the movie that you wrote as well. I think they're fantastic, and I really encourage others to read and to view it.
Thank you, and I do too. It's a great cause and a great marriage, really, of Johnny Cash and important work that you're advocating for here. Thank you.
Thank you again, Mike, and have a good day. Thank you, everybody, for watching.